All right, thank you very much. And thank you for everyone who is joining us today. The purpose of this particular session is to do more of an admissions deep dive. So we'll go over everything you need to know about admissions. Let me first start by introducing us. My name is Anne. For those of you who don't know me, I'm at the bottom of this slide. I'm a recruitment officer and advisor working for Tilburg University, which is a university specialized in business and economics, social and behavioral sciences, law, humanities, and some digital sciences as well. And I'm going to let Amy introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Amy Janssen-Brennan. I'm the Assistant Director of Recruitment and Admission at the Rotterdam School of Management, which is the business faculty of the Erasmus University. So I'm mostly responsible for the admissions team at RSM. Yeah, I've been working in this field for about 11 years now at RSM, and before this I worked at the NUFIC. So a lot of you are aware of the NUFIC, I think, the Dutch NARIC. Dennis?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, or for the people for who it's afternoon at the moment. My name is Dennis Baas. I'm a strategic advisor, international marketing and recruitment for Eindhoven University of Technology. And the university offers programs in the fields of engineering, science, and technology. So that's basically Eindhoven University.
All right, thanks panelists. Now, what will we be covering today? We'll be giving you a quick overview of the Dutch education system, and I know a lot of you are familiar, so I'll try to keep that brief. We'll talk about eligibility, application and selection procedure. So what does that look like? The different application systems you might encounter. We'll talk about accepting offers, which is something we get more and more questions about nowadays. And we'll show you a few student profiles so that you can get an idea of which student might be a good fit in terms of admission for which place. So first and foremost, our educational philosophy. In the Netherlands, we really believe in access to education. Whether a student lives in the north, the south, the east, or the west, they should be able to access high quality education and education that suits their needs, their interests, and their level. So a student who graduates from, let's say, high school in Maastricht, but wants to attend university in Groningen, everything is standardized enough for that to be recognized. We also have a system in place where students are kind of streamed into a form of education that suits them to prepare them for the next step onward. So every time you take a step in the education in the Netherlands, that provides you with a ticket to the next step. I'll show you what that actually looks like. So here you see that all the students go to elementary school between the ages of 4 and 12, actually from 5 onwards, it's mandatory. And after that, they do a national test, but combined with the advice from their teacher, that brings them to the next step in education. We don't make a distinction between middle school and high school, so I'm just going to call it high school for convenience sake. One of the options is for students to enroll in the 4-year high school called VMBO, which is the more vocational track. So students complete this 4-year high school, and after that they can enroll in what's called MBO, which is the vocational education. So this is where students are prepared for very specific professions, such as, you know, in the building area, personal care, such as like beautician, hairdresser, also things like teacher's assistant. So those types of jobs. About 50% of the population gets into this stream. And there's not a lot in English, so we tend not to talk much about it. But what we will talk about is the next two. One of the possible high schools that students can go to is called HAVO, and this is the school that prepares students for University of Applied Sciences. As you can see, it's 1 year longer than the VMBO, and another difference is because it's not just the length, but it's also the type of learning, the subjects that students follow, the level of depth that they go into, and the pace is also different from this 4-year high school, so that it matches and prepares students for the next step in their educational journey. And then there is the 6-year high school, also called VWO. And this is the ticket to enter research universities, of which all of us here are represented today. You can also see in this graph that I also included already the master phase, because it's very common for students to do a master after a bachelor at a research university. Before we implemented the bachelor master structure, this used to be one deal, and you see that a lot in other European countries as well. So employers in the Netherlands generally expect a student who comes from a research university to have what is equivalent to a master's degree. But the bachelor master structure gives students a lot of flexibility to enter the labor market anyway after the bachelor, or to pursue a master's at a different institution, for example. But because it's such a normal step for us, I've already included it in this graph. What's also good to know is that universities of applied sciences, they tend to make students labor market ready, but more and more there are also professional masters available which follow at a University of Applied Sciences. And as you can see from the gray arrow, I made it gray in the graph to indicate that it is possible for students who complete a University of Applied Sciences degree to go to a master's at a research university. However, they usually cannot go for direct entry. So they usually have to do a pre-master, which is 6 months to a full year in order to make up the gaps. Now, just for those of you who are educators at heart and who think, oh my God, so when students are 12 years old, it's already set whether they can go to university or not. Don't worry, there's actually lots of switches possible within the system. And you can also do what we call stacking. So for example, if students are enrolled at a University of Applied Sciences and they complete the first year, that means that after that, they could decide to apply for first-year entry into a research university. And many research universities do accept this route, not all of them, but many do. So that way students can still segue within the system. And there are similar segues possible in different places. I didn't put all of them in here because it's not relevant to the presentation today. But I did want to point out for you guys that I am also an example of these students. I was in the 6-year high school, the VWO track, so I could have gone to research university, but I wanted to become an elementary school teacher at the time. That did not work out, as you can see, which is a degree offered at a University of Applied Sciences. So I enrolled in a University of Applied Sciences, that's the arrow pointing left. And then after that, I decided to do a pre-master and then do a master at a research university. Of course, it takes longer, but all these possible switches are possible within the system. Now, here's just to recap the difference between research universities and universities of applied sciences. It's mostly in the focus. So research universities are academic level institutions where we go quite deep to an academic level. We conduct fundamental research, and students are also asked to look beyond just how to do something, but also ask the why questions. University of Applied Sciences, on the other hand, also offer higher education, but it's a preparation for a specific profession. Some degrees are only offered there. For example, anything in fine arts, tourism, nursing, elementary school teaching, all those cases where students just need a preparation for a specific job are offered at universities of applied sciences. But of course, there are also degrees that are offered at both levels, which can then become a little bit confusing. We've got lots of sessions this week that go more into that, but that's not for today. Today, the focus is on admissions. So I'm going to give the floor to Dennis, who's going to tell you more about eligibility.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Okay, the first question, maybe you can already show the next slide. Yes, so the first question is when a student wants to go to a certain university, is to see if their diploma is good enough to enter that particular university. So as we already mentioned, what we are looking for research universities is to look for equivalent of the VWO diploma, and for the universities of applied sciences, we're looking for equivalence of the HAVO diploma. And when students apply, basically, and when admissions officers get these diplomas, they will look at it and they will see, okay, this is a known diploma or this is an unknown diploma. And when it's a known diploma, of course, IB diploma, for example, then they know exactly what to do. But in some cases, there are also unknown diplomas, and then it comes to mostly comes from students from countries that we do not often get applicants from. So what we do then is to check whether there is information available from the NUFIC. The NUFIC is the organization that supports higher education in general, but also when it comes to look at the value of certain diplomas from certain countries. And they have a database with a lot of country information. So most of the regular countries where we get students from can be found in those in that database. But in case that that they do not have that information, or it's just a very small country where we do not receive that many applicants from, we can send it to the NUFIC to get advice. And based on this advice, the university can choose whether they will follow the advice or they will modify it a little bit and decide then in the end as a university if the student can be admitted or not. So as you can see, so there is a sort of standardized thing here. The NUFIC gives us advice, But of course, some universities have very much experience with admitting certain type of students, so that they are able to say, okay, the NUFIC says, for example, equivalent of HAVO, but we know that from this type particular school, the students are much better than the general. So we as a university decided to let the student in, for example. So that's a little bit how it works at universities. But in general, I can say, and I conclude here, is that most of the universities do follow the advice of the NUFIC. And in a few cases, we modify it as universities in general. Yeah, so these are some general diploma requirements for diplomas that are very common in the Netherlands, so that we were able to say a little bit more than just saying, okay, it's a university in the end that decides. But for a research university, you can see that, for example, a full IB diploma makes the student eligible. Although for some programs, they do look at how to say that, subjects as well at the same time. The same for the A levels, but also in those situations, students can decide, the universities can decide and saying, hey, you have to have some specific subjects. Same with the American high school diploma, and the same also with the European diploma. So these are just the ones that are very regular and that and that universities normally accept. But in most cases, they will also look for particular programs to the subjects that the students took at these different degrees. So the same goes for the Universities of Applied Sciences. So that's the next slide. As you can see, it's almost similar as the research universities, but a little bit lower. So the HAVO, the equivalence of HAVO is a little bit lower than that one of the VWO. So that basically means that University of Applied Sciences, they accept students with a little bit lower degree in that sense. So all the other diplomas, as we see here, like the full IB diploma is what they accept as well. But in some cases, they also accept a regular diploma with some certificates of the IB. And that's the same basically for all the other degrees that you will find here. So yeah, so I think just browse a little bit to the list or look a little bit to the list. Not that much to say about that specifically. Then we come to the next one. Yeah, so there's also cases that the student does not meet the diploma requirements that we have as in this case, a research university. And of course, what is next for them? And we saw that these students have 3 different options. Basically, they can do 1 year of university in their home country. So that's, and then they have to look at the sort of similar field that they want to study here in the Netherlands. They can also decide to say, okay, I'm going to 1 year, if they are admitted, to University of Applied Sciences. And then also we advise to look for a similar field. And in some cases, some universities provide also a pathway program, especially for students that do not meet the requirements and they have a certain program in place that gets them into a certain program. And there is a session about this, and Anne is doing that session. I think, I'm not sure if this is still still going on this week. So if you are interested to learn more about that, then I advise you to go to that session. So yeah, so next to the diploma requirements, I think it's good to mention that there are other requirements as well. So, and I already mentioned that a little bit earlier, too. Subject requirements is something that some programs really look at. So, for example, for my university, I'm from a technical university. So for all our programs, students need to have a certain level of mathematics in order to get in. So then the diploma plus the mathematics gives them access to the engineering courses that we offer. Some cases also universities ask for minimum scores, so like GPAs in order to get in. It also depends on the university, so there's no, I cannot say this in general that all universities look at this, but some universities do, so that you really need to check the university and the program itself in order to see if that's the case. And of course, the English language requirements, students normally need to have a TOEFL, IELTS, or Cambridge proficiency test. Of course, there are exemptions when students doing an IB diploma, for example. In most cases, they do not need to do an English language test, but those are requirements that some programs have. Then other requirements, and then you have to think about, for example, students that would like to do a music program or like a design program, and then they normally have to show a certain portfolio or something, and that could be also an extra requirement. So this is more about the requirements. The next step is the selectivity and the matching.
Okay, so that's where I take over. So yeah, as Dennis just pointed out, the first step is always, is a student actually eligible for admission? And the first step that every admissions office takes when we're confronted with a foreign diploma is to fit it into our system. So most foreign diplomas will fit into the HAVO category or FAVO. Sometimes they're a bit in between. So that's the first step that we take. After we check that, then we come to, we have basically two types of programs in the Netherlands. One, we're calling them general admission. And for a lot of foreigners, these programs look like they're not selective at all. However, because we've already selected our students at age 11, we don't select our students anymore. But that's a bit, so it sounds like it's open admission, but it's not quite the same thing. But basically, if you most of the programs, bachelor programs in the Netherlands are general admissions programs. So that means if you're eligible, then you get a spot. So in that case, we first have something that's called a matching procedure. And basically what that means is the Dutch government wants to make sure that students they've chosen the right bachelor, basically. So universities are allowed to sort of decide what kind of procedure they want to develop for this. Some universities ask the students to come to a conversation they have with a student advisor or someone from the program to make sure the student really understands what the program is about. We maybe would look at their math grade, for example, if math is important, and say, okay, your math isn't that strong. Are you sure that this is a good program for you? And then we advise the student either, yes, we think this is a good match, or no, this is not a good match for you. However, this is not, generally speaking, not a binding advice. So the student can decide, well, this university decides, I'm probably not a good match, but I still want to do it, so I will continue. So that's the matching procedure. Then we have also selective programs. There are three types of selective program, which I will go into more depth in a few minutes. But we have small scale intensive programs. We have selective programs that are based on talent, and we have the Numerus Fixus. For those types of programs, the university has to select you. And if you're selected, then we can give you a conditional offer of admission. After what the conditional offer usually means for most programs is that you still have to prove that you have completed your secondary school program. Or for example, we have to verify your English exam scores, that sort of thing. Once that has been done, then your offer becomes unconditional. And after the unconditional, after your offer has been made unconditional, then we move on to the enrollment phase of the so then basically we register you for the program. And another thing to keep in mind is the Netherlands generally has something called binding study advice. And contrary to the matching procedure, this advice is actually, it is binding. So that means you have to complete, in most cases, all study points. So 60 credits, you need to complete the first full year in the first year. Otherwise, you'll be asked to leave the program. Some universities have, you must finish about 45 credits, but usually every university has some kind of like minimum points you have to complete in the first year. Otherwise, you will have to stop studying this particular program. So that's good to keep in mind. So the matching, I just spoke about that a bit. So basically it's a check to make sure the program is a good fit for the student and vice versa. And the underlying goal of this matching trajectory is to make sure that students are choosing a program that actually fits them and to reduce the percentage of dropout rates. In most cases, if you apply to a program before a certain date, it's a mandatory thing, but after a certain date, and that date can vary per program, then it becomes a mandatory. So if you don't do it, then the program can actually prevent you from starting. So that's also something that students should keep in mind. Next slide. Okay, to getting into the 3 types of selective programs, we have the talent-based selection, and these kinds of programs basically are the arts programs. So things like, you want to do a ballet program, or you want to do for a musical instrument, that sort of thing. So you have to have some kind of talent in order to be selected into the program, and the selection procedure usually includes something like an audition or an assessment of your portfolio, can include an interview, a motivation letter, some kind of exam. Again, these sort of procedures can vary per program, but they're always for something like arts or something. The next kind is for the small scale and intensive programs. These programs are things like university colleges, liberal arts programs, and hotel schools, for example. These programs usually have a very high staff to student ratio, have a high concentration of contact hours, lots of extracurricular activities, that sort of thing. And the selection for these programs is meant to make sure that the student is a very good fit with that education concept. So for example, for hotel schools, they're looking for really outgoing students, maybe have an excellent, a lot of customer service skills, that sort of thing. And so there's a whole special process that they have created to make sure they find the right students. So the students who meet sort of their picture of the ideal student for their program will be admitted to these types of programs. And then the last kind of selection that we have are the Numerus Fixus programs. This is the most rigid sort of rigidly governed sort of selection. There are strict national deadlines. So if your student wants to apply to a Numerus Fixus program, they must have registered in StudyLink by the 15th of January, for example, and all students will hear if they've been selected to these programs on the same day. That's the 15th of April. It's coming up. And historically speaking, Numerus Fixus was actually created for the Dutch market. So for students who want to study things like medicine, dentistry, physical therapy, that sort of thing. Although nowadays they've also extended it to include very popular large-scale programs like business administration. My own program, International Business Administration, is a Numerus Fixus program. Psychology has also recently been added to the list, and criminology is another very popular one that falls under Numerus Fixus. So these programs have very strict application deadlines and acceptance procedures, which are regulated by the government. They're very inflexible. So if you don't follow the rules, then yeah, it can make you sort of be bumped out of the process. So you're really very important to follow the instructions for programs. And yeah, the admissions process varies wildly. We have a quite forward selection process, but for example, if you want to study medicine, there's a lot of different things you have to do in order to become accepted. You also can only apply for 2 Numerus Fixus programs at a time. But we'll get into that on a later slide. The procedures and deadlines. I think I have the first 2 slides. For StudyLink, as I mentioned before, StudyLink is a system that basically, if you want to study in the Netherlands, you can't get around. It's a national student registration system. And at some point, your students will have to register in this. For most applications, this is the first step. But again, that can be different per university. So again, you need to make sure your students really are reading the requirements. Usually there's also a second step required in the process. So at some point, usually you will have to have your student that will have to register or complete their application in one of like a system called Osiris, which most universities are using. Or for example, at my university, we have our own application system. So again, those are the things that can differ per university. Next slide. how to apply. Yeah, this is also something that differs per university. I know we put a lot of time and energy into our website, and the information that we put on there really have written out all of the steps that students need to take. And I know that my colleagues at other universities have also put a lot of time and effort into this. So it's very important that students really read the information that's available and follow the instructions. Because again, the deadlines can vary per university. I think that was my last slide.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll take over from here to talk a little bit more about StudyLink. Some of this stuff has been covered already, so I'll go fairly quickly. There is a limit of 4 programs that you can register for in StudyLink. Now, as Amy said, for some programs, StudyLink is the first step. So that means 4 programs in total. There are still a few universities that allow you to register in their own system and then register in StudyLink later on. So that could be your secret 5th option. But in general, I would say stick to the rule of 4 at the same time, also to keep things manageable for yourself. There are some further restrictions. As you just heard, only 2 of those 4 can be a Numerus Fixus program, and only 1 of those 2 can be a specific high demand Numerus Fixus program of medicine or physiotherapy. Dental also falls into that, but that's not offered in English anyway. So if your student is applying for medicine, that's one of the Numerus Fixus spots. Then the second application can be another Numerus Fixus, for example, psychology. But then the 3rd and the 4th one have to be a non-Numerus Fixus program. So that is something to keep in mind in terms of numbers. Now, if students change their mind, or maybe they're not accepted for a certain program and there's still plenty of time, which is possible if you've applied early in the year, you can actually still withdraw a certain program from StudyLink and replace it with another one. We advise students not to play around with the Numerus Fixus one due to the very, very strict systems, regulations, rules, etc. So tread lightly, only withdraw something if you're pretty sure that you're not going to enroll. But that offers a bit more possibility for students who have maybe overshot their choices. Maybe they've registered for 2 Numerus Fixus and 2 university colleges and not been accepted to any of those 4, or have been waitlisted. If there's still time, then you can still put another application in. So that gives a little bit of peace of mind, maybe. If you're having trouble with StudyLink, nowadays it's possible to do a lot of resets yourself, but if you really get stuck, contact one of the programs that the student has applied for. And my personal advice would be pick the one that you know is already most responsive. And then that admissions office can also help you if an account needs to be reset, for example. We heard about a funny case this morning. 2 twins who were trying to register, but their StudyLink accounts were automatically being deduplicated because they had the same birthday and probably same last name, but also probably they were using some sort of family email address. So that's one of the things that you would probably need support with from the university. So keep that one in mind. Then in terms of deadlines, Amy already mentioned it a little bit. I'll go in a bit more depth. As we've warned you now, the Numerus Fixus application deadlines are very strict. You have to be registered in StudyLink for the correct Numerus Fixus program by January 15th, because otherwise you cannot take part in the selection. So this is a really, really tough one. So please don't create your StudyLink account on January 14th in case there is some sort of issue. So if your students are applying for Numerus Fixus programs, best thing is to advise them to do their research earlier on and start things in the fall, maybe before Christmas. Other types of selections, such as the university colleges, other types of selective programs can set their own deadlines. So it depends on how much time they need to process the application. Most of the ones we found by doing our research were between either December 1st and May 1st. So there is a bit of a range there. I have not found a program that had a deadline before December 1st. So if there is one, that's a really special one that I'm not aware of. So in general, if your students do their research and start their application processes in the fall, they probably will not have missed any deadlines in the Netherlands. Then when it comes to those non-selective or general admission programs, the most important thing that we need to do after your student has applied is check their educational background. And then there's other stuff to arrange, like maybe visa and housing. So that's why for non-EU passport holders, the deadlines are usually around April 1st, May 1st. The official deadline also for Dutch students is 1st of May, because that also leaves time to do this matching procedure. But there are some programs that still take EU students up to as late as July 1st or even August. So if your student is completely desperate, there are still some options open towards that end of the year, but you will have severely limited your options by then. So that's just something to keep in mind. And then the process of accepting offers, also important to talk about. This follows a very strict timeline and very strict procedure in the case of Numerus Fixus programs. So all of the students who have participated in a Numerus Fixus selection procedure will be placed on this ranking, and the ranking is released on April 15th. Now, if a student falls within the cohort that there is room for, then along with their ranking number, they will also be offered a place for the program. Which they then have to log into StudyLink in order to accept. So this is again one of those important ones to know about, that because Numerus Fixus processes are so strictly regulated that StudyLink really comes into play there. It's also important to know that in the case of Numerus Fixus, students have only 2 weeks to accept their place. So if they don't do that, the place will automatically be forfeited to the next person on the ranking. So in that sense, the ranking kind of moves up. It also means that if your student has been waitlisted, meaning they get their ranking number but no place offered yet, they might be offered a place a little bit later in the process. So that can be 1 or 2 or 3 or even 6 weeks later. So that is something to keep in mind. What's also important to note is that for Numerus Fixus programs, students can only hold 1 offer at the same time. So if your student has applied for 2 Numerus Fixus programs and they get 2 offers at the same time, it's helpful if they've already decided which one is their favorite one beforehand, because they can only accept one and it automatically cancels the other one. Now, if your student has been accepted for one program and waitlisted for another, they can accept the one they've been given at that moment and choose to enroll. If the waitlisted one gives the student a place later on, let's say 2 weeks later, and the student prefers that one, they can choose to accept that one, but it will automatically cancel the first one. And there's no switching back and forth with that either. So students have to be pretty aware of what they're doing, and they have to know what their program of choice is. It's also important to know that when you accept a program for a Numerus Fixus, you are holding a place that would otherwise go to another student. So please do talk about the ethics of this with your students as well. If they've applied to other countries, other systems, if they are not going to enroll in this Numerus Fixus program, to forfeit that place as soon as possible, because then it can actually go to another student. And with Numerus Fixus, that's a very real consequence. Now, when we talk about the other types of programs, so non-Numerus Fixus, in general, the procedures around accepting offers are a bit more strict for the selective programs. And here we're talking about the talent-based programs, the university colleges, the hotel schools, the small-scale and selective programs. So usually there will be a procedure in place where the university will ask the student to officially confirm that they will accept their place. But because this goes outside of StudyLink, it differs a bit from university to university what it looks like. So for some universities, it's a form that students need to sign and send back. In some cases, there might be a small deposit required as well. And generally, there's not a lot of flexibility in stretching deadlines. However, if your student is really waiting for the outcome of another program, the best thing to do is to contact the admissions office of that program. And by then you've been in contact with them about the whole application, and ask if an extension is possible at all. If it is not possible, you could also choose to accept the place, but then please do, if you're not planning to attend, give it up as soon as you hear back from the other university. In other cases, non-selective programs, sometimes there's no real procedure to accept an offer. Sometimes the procedure is similar to those of selective programs, where you send back a document. Sometimes it's an email where you tick a box. Generally, there's a lot more flexibility because these are general admission programs. So as long as you're registered in StudyLink, usually the university will assume and account for your arrival. So if you are guiding students in this process and they've applied for 4 programs, please do tell them to withdraw their applications that they're not going to enroll in, and to inform those admissions officers so that they can plan ahead for the year. And I'm going to give the floor back to Dennis. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about student profile. And basically, we will also look at we made some profiles, so you can see whether a particular student is a good fit for our universities. But first, some general things. So what kind of students are we looking for? And of course, I realize this is very general, so keep that in mind. But in general, you can also say that the Netherlands is an open-minded country. So it also means that we are looking for also open-minded people. And when it comes to research universities, especially, I can also say, hey, that curiosity in general, when you want to pursue an academic career or to do something academic, then being curious is also, I think, a characteristic that really suits a research university. Furthermore, adventures, I think, is also one of the things. If a student of 17, 18 years old decides to study abroad without their families and leaving their families behind in their home country, then you can say that some students, or most of the students that are doing that, they tend to be more adventurous than the students that keep at home and choose a university there. So there's also connected to the fact that student needs to be a little bit independent and should be able to deal with independent of being independent. Certainly because the family is far away, so it's not that easy to ask them for help every time. So this is also something, but I think this is in general that students that go abroad that need a certain level of independency. And of course, last but not least, interested in academic knowledge, especially when it comes to research universities, then the whys are very important. Should like to learn about theories and how things work. And of course, this will also help them later on, because that if they want to do a master and maybe after that a PDing or a PhD, then I think the fact that they need to be interested in academic knowledge in order to do so. So this is very general, and it's very difficult to put a whole all students on this label. But yeah, this is basically what in general we are looking for in the students. Then we go to the profiles of Wendy, and this is for Amy.
Yes, so this is one of the profiles that we made up. So here we have Wendy. She's interested in business administration sort of courses or hospitality management. She's currently doing the full IB diploma. She's a dual citizen, and one of her passports is an EEA passport. She's getting pretty decent grades, 31 IB points predicted, but she struggles with mathematics a lot. Yeah, as I mentioned before, she's really interested in a business sort of programs. She's very service oriented and has done a lot of extracurricular activities. So yeah, the question is where would a student like this be best at home? Would she fit with my program, for example? Well, she does meet the requirements if you look at them generally speaking. However, for example, business management, business administration courses at research universities, they're quite math heavy. So the fact that she struggles with math is could be an issue for her. But for example, say she just maybe wasn't very interested in math, but she can do the math. She could take maybe, for example, an extra math exam, proving to the universities that she is actually good enough. So maybe she could get into one of the research universities for a business administration course. But another maybe better advice for a student like this would be to take a look at a University of Applied Science, for example, where business administration tends to be a little bit less math heavy, unless you do, of course, a finance related course, and then math would be very important. But something like that, hospitality management does contain math, but not at the same, not as intensely as research universities. So that might be a better fit for her. So for non-Numerus Fixus programs at research universities, she probably is admissible. For a program that's very selective like RSM, she probably would not be admissible because her math grade is not likely high enough. And we have a lot of applicants, so she probably would not make the selection. And a student with an IB diploma would I think in most cases in the country would be exempt from an English exam. So this student I would advise to try University of Applied Science. Next person.
Yes, this is Yusuf. Well, he's interested in engineering in general. He attended a prestigious national school in Turkey. He will have like the national diploma, the lycée diplomacy, and has very good grades in mathematics, a good GPA, but no IB and no AP classes. But on the other hand, he will take an SAT test in the summer. And hoping that it will give him some options at the universities. So this is what we call a little bit of a typical case. If you look at what he wants to do, if he wants to go to a research university doing an engineering program, then he will have the problem that he's got like the national lycée diplomacy diploma, because all of the engineering universities in the Netherlands, they will advise him or they will tell him, hey, that diploma is not sufficient. So he needs AP classes and certificates in order to get into a research university, which basically are with the research university, I mean the technical universities. However, he might go with this diploma. There are options in the Netherlands to go to a research university as well, but not on an engineering program in general. So that's a little bit the case with this type of diploma. The technical universities do not accept it directly. Some universities do accept it under certain circumstances. For example, I know that Tilburg University accepts lycée diplomacy, but this really depends on the university itself. There's no general rule saying, hey, he cannot study in the Netherlands at all. This is basically where universities decided to decide themselves whether they would accept a student with a lycée diplomacy or not. And then John.
All right, I'm gonna walk you through John's profile for a little bit. John has many interests, so he's not sure yet what he wants to study, maybe combining different fields. He's attending a British school in Spain, and he is completing 3 GCE A-levels. The A-levels he's doing are English literature, media studies, and history. It's important to note. His first level language is English, and also he's doing A-level. So in most cases, that means he meets the English language requirement for university already. He's a very hands-on learner and very active in the community. So when we look at John's profile, what would be his options and what would be our advice? Well, when we look at the possibilities, we see that with the grades of A, B, and C, he is actually eligible for research university in the Netherlands because the minimum grade that we require for A-levels is a C. However, because he's such a broadly interested student, the first thing that we would maybe think of is a university college, because that's a place where you are able to combine different subjects. However, the university colleges tend to be a bit more selective, so he might have trouble being selected for the more selective university colleges. One option could be to look at the less selective university college as an option. The other problem with his academic background is that one of his A-levels is media studies, and media studies is generally not considered as an academic A-level. So we are not always sure that it prepares a student enough for the academic environment. The tricky thing is that most universities don't actually list on their website which A-levels are accepted and which ones are not. So that makes it a bit difficult to do the research for John. But this is one of the reasons why he may not be found eligible for research universities and instead would be asked or would be a better fit for University of Applied Sciences. The university colleges tend to be operational only at research university level because of the broad academic discipline. But he could pursue a degree at the University of Applied Sciences that is also quite broad, or maybe that is creative. For example, I'm thinking of a program that they offer at Windesheim Honors College, which is project and change management. So that's quite a broad interdisciplinary program that might be interesting for him. And if he's thriving there after the first year, he could consider applying for the first year of a research university as well. So this is the kind of student where maybe you would submit some research university applications, some applied science, and it also is helpful to start early in the process so that you have enough time to figure the right path for John. Now, this brings us to the end of the session, and we do have time for questions. So I'm going to invite our moderator back to help us with the Q&A.
Hello, everyone. I'll turn my light on so you can see me. We have a few questions in here, and we've been answering some of them as we go along. But I do want to pose a couple of them to the panelists here. And the first one is from Linda. And it also speaks to sort of some of the other sort of general issues about recognizing different curricula across the country. So she's asking, what is the GPA equivalent for US schools and what type of AP scores are required? So Anne, could you answer that?
Yes, in general, most universities will ask for at least a 3 on the APs. However, it's also good to note that whenever it comes to non-EU curricula, universities might differ a little bit. So for example, some universities will ask for 4 APs with a minimum score of 3. Other universities will ask for a minimum GPA of, I guess, 3.5 or 3 with 3 APs, for example. But this is one of those cases where, unfortunately, universities have a bit of freedom. So it does take a little bit of research. Caroline, I don't know if you want to add, because I know that Leiden and Tilburg have different requirements there.
In general, I'd say certainly the US is one of the ones that there isn't consistency across the country as to what's required. And there are a few other countries that don't have that consistency either. You know, Turkey is one of them, for example, Brazil, Vietnam. Some of these curricula will be seen differently across the institutions. So you do have to check per institution on that one. We have another question from an anonymous attendee. When selecting the IB and StudyLink for a UK-based student, is it okay to choose Switzerland as the country you're obtaining the diploma from? Because that's the only place that you see IB listed. Dennis, you had tick marked that one. So
because it's related to the StudyLink situation, and in most cases, what we would advise, I mean, students here is just to check the country, but also look for other options. So in most cases, when you look at a country, you see the more regular programs, the regular diplomas that they can get, but there's there's always an option other, and in that situation, I would advise students to fill that one in. And then the IB diploma. So it's known for the institution that they did an IB diploma, for example, in Germany, Switzerland, or wherever. So do not try to look for IB diplomas in every country and then choose that one because that doesn't match where she or he did the IB diploma.
Yeah. So choose the right country and then other, and stick your IB in there. Good advice.
Yeah.
Chanel is asking, where can you search for non-selective programs still accepting applications for the fall of 2021? Can you do this in StudyLink or studyinholland.com? Amy, do you have the answer to this, or Anne? You can also maybe add in something.
Yeah, I don't know if we have a sort of a list. I mean, there's one Studiekoers 1, 2, 3, but that's in Dutch, so I don't think that will help many people. I mean, yeah, my advice would be to look at the universities themselves, I think, to see what the deadlines are. There's not really I don't think, an English language site that has this sort of an oversight on this, as far as I know.
I'm also not aware of one that exists. Caroline, are you?
No, which was the answer to the question, I think. Unfortunately, it's not easy. It is literally per program because, as you guys explained, deadlines also depend on nationalities and programs. So it would be, I think, even impossible for DRU to make this list for our own institutions.
I mean,
so sorry.
Yeah. One thing you could do is develop a sort of feeling for which universities are more selective and which are less, and then when you become more familiarized with the system as a whole, you'll start to have a sort of feeling for which ones might be still open and which ones might not. But yeah, that's the best advice.
And I think the majority of the programs in the country are not selective. And I think if it's not a selective program, most programs will still be open until at least the 15th of May, I think. That's sort of a rule of thumb, but yeah.
Depending on nationality as well. That's and so forth. We have a quick question. Michael Kripek is asking, for non-selective programs, is it still true that there's no cap on the number of students that can be admitted to the program as long as they meet the entry requirements? Anne?
That is indeed true. This sometimes proposes some issues for us as universities when programs really change a lot from the previous year, because of course we have to deal with resources, planning, lecturers, lecture rooms. So in that sense, such an open, welcoming system sometimes makes things difficult for us. But at the moment, indeed, if a program is general admission, then that is the case. And normally they don't perform that weirdly. Normally what we get one year kind of links to what we got the year before. So it is still manageable in that sense.
As I ask the next couple of questions, Dennis, I want to point, there's 3 questions for you specifically in the thing. So if you could type the answers to those, so we aren't going to spend individual time. Or of course, if you have a specific university question, you can join the speed dating sessions this week to ask questions to the universities themselves. I want to bring up a question here about the transfer situation. So we have Maria is asking, could a student from architecture or studying architecture in Colombia transfer to a university in Holland? And maybe you can sort of reiterate the transfer options or what that means in the Netherlands.
Yeah, sure. I mean, in general, we don't really allow students to transfer into the middle of a degree. It's much more common for students to then be asked still to start at the start of the degree. The only thing programs sometimes do is give some exemptions if there's enough overlap in the actual program. But generally, we would ask the student to start from year 1. And since Amy is an admissions officer, I see her nodding. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would have said. We also, people ask us sometimes, can I start in the non-selective Dutch language program at business administration and then transfer into the higher year of the IBA? And no, we don't allow that. So yeah, we do the same. Very, very occasionally you could get some credit for something, but generally we don't do that. Like, I know in the United States you have the APs and that will give you advanced standing in certain courses. That does not happen in the Netherlands.
Perfect. We have another question in the chat that's fairly, it's a complicated question, but it speaks to diploma equivalencies. So we have regarding minimum versus standard requirements. Oh, wait, sorry. I have to scroll back up. It's from Emily. So to assist the university assessment, what can a counselor share to provide the rigor of the curriculum? For example, students from national schools in Brazil involved in Olympiads or ranking in top places for national exams. If we could convince high schools to provide the context to course description along with outside academic work, would that be one way to compete with the AB and IB coursework? Not sure if Amy has any thoughts on this. I have thoughts on this. Anne has thoughts on this probably. So I'll start with Amy. I'll start with Amy.
Sure. Yeah. That could be something that could help us in making a decision. Certainly for extracurriculars. I mean, for my program, you know, you have to have the motivation segment. So that's 25% of the score you would get. So that could help. You know, maybe explaining that the extracurriculars that they did. Yeah. As to making them more competitive. Yeah, I think that's a difficult thing. Yeah, I mean, sometimes schools will say, for example, in France, there's some schools that are more competitive than others, and we'll get sort of a additional information, and sometimes we can do something with that information, but it really depends on the school.
Yeah, maybe as an addition, I think it also depends on how sophisticated, it sounds a bit bad, but how sophisticated the admissions office is, how much time they have. Because I think, Amy, your admissions office is quite sophisticated and advanced, and some other universities also look quite in depth. One thing I would say to this is that if the student doesn't meet the minimum IB requirements or the minimum entrance requirements, then usually the extracurriculars cannot really make up for that, because we just look for the basic minimum academic first, and then we look at all those other aspects.
Yeah, and I think these things as well, the extracurriculars, that would only be something that would be looked at in a selective program. So like my program, that's one of the criteria. But if it's just a general admission, like you said, and it's not going to make up for any deficiencies, but it could help in a more selective program.
Dennis, I thought you were trying to add something there, or no?
Well, I can add that basically what they look for first is the diploma itself. So if the diploma, and I think for Brazil, for example, there's, when they look at my universities, they just have a general rule. say, hey, if they're from Brazil, they have a regular high school diploma, then they need to have to do 1 year of university education or one of the other pathway programs in order to get in. So we will not, that they will basically, it will basically stop at that point to look at the application because they do not meet the diploma requirement.
Yes, and so for me, this question really spoke to the equivalencies themselves, and international curricula don't compete with one another. So we're not comparing the Brazil curriculum to the AP or the IB. They're comparing it directly to the VWO or the HAVO. So you don't have to worry about competing with other students in that sense. So it does come down to the equivalencies, what NUFIC says and what every individual institution says, because Brazil is, again, one of those countries that you will find differences across the research universities for certain in terms of what they will accept and who they will accept. So my institution does, Dennis's doesn't, with the high school diploma. So you do have to double check per institution sometimes to find if you're from one of those countries, but there's nothing to convince NUFIC necessarily that we would look at that credential differently, so to speak. So yeah, I think that's sort of probably sums us up, and we're right actually at 4 o'clock our time. So that brings us to the end of our session today. I want to thank all of our panelists for putting so much hard work into this session. And for all of you for joining us today. Hopefully we'll see you at some of our other sessions throughout the week. And again, just a reminder to sign up for your speed dating session if you'd like to chat with us all individually about our institutions. There's lots of options this week to do so. So thanks again and have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.